extravagant. I don't know what I call this. The Clear Truth Live show, everybody. That's what it should be called.
There you
Short,
go.
simple, sweet. CTLS, as we like to call it, as of 2 seconds ago. You're very welcome wherever you are. And whatever time you're watching this in, whatever year you're watching this in, you could be watching this in the future. You're unlikely to be watching it in the past. However, so great to be with you. I am Jamie Bambrick, your host. With me, as always, is Steven Whitlow. Steven, do you want to say hi? Tell people who you are.
Yeah, hey everybody. I'm Steven. Jamie, do you guys do Thanksgiving in Ireland? Do you like acknowledge its existence?
No, Thanksgiving is a made-up holiday. It's not real.
Got it.
Yeah.
Unless it's like international, it doesn't count.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it is. It is an exclusively American thing. We do have some Americans over here, and they celebrate it. And I haven't been invited to one yet, so I'm kind of hurt.
Yeah.
I'm not thankful about that. But if I do get invited, I will go.
Fantastic. But I mean, other than that,
Yeah.
it's just a normal Thursday for everybody, right?
Yes, it is. Yes, yes. It's Thanksgiving tomorrow for you guys, is it? Or not tomorrow, Thursday,
It is
2 days
in
from now. Yeah.
2 days. 2 days from now.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very
And
good.
this time we get
So
you know,
let me-
we get to celebrate. We're thankful.
Yeah, yeah. We are going to be joined, everybody, by Doug Ponder forthwith. He is coming. It's updating Riverside. That's why he's not on yet. So we'll do filler chat. That's what this is. But stay with us because it will be interesting. Here's a question from an outside perspective. So for us, right, turkey and ham, those are Christmas meats. That's what you eat at Christmas. Do you guys do turkey and ham? Because I know you do definitely turkey at Thanksgiving. Do you do turkey and ham at Thanksgiving and then again at Christmas? Or is Christmas optional?
Well, I mean, the traditional Thanksgiving meal is just turkey. I think there's been
Okay.
a fight and a resurgence for ham lately, but turkey's
Okay.
still, by and large, dominating. And I personally never grew up in a home that did turkey on Christmas. It was always like the Christmas ham. And so
Right.
we just split it, okay? We just made it
Okay.
two things instead of
Right.
one, right? You guys just brought it all together.
Yeah, we do. So as far as I'm concerned, it's essentially the essential Christmas meats are turkey, ham, and then pigs in blankets. Do you guys have that?
I mean, we have pigs in blankets. I can't say it's very popular.
Okay, that's kind of
It's
a
as
must.
popular
It's,
as Kamala Harris.
okay, well that's. I mean, to be fair,
No.
I mean, still 70 million or whatever people would be eating it by that reckoning. It's
Yeah, but how many of them actually wanted to vote for her?
Yeah, exactly. They were eating the pigs in blankets because a more
Yes.
American version was not there. There wasn't a bald eagle on offer.
Was not
Doug,
available.
you're with us.
Exactly.
What's up,
Howdy.
guys?
We-
Sorry I'm late.
Just so you know, we are live because we do go live at 7. But this is fine. This is like a casual.
I love the live
chat.
action shots.
This is exciting.
Yeah.
Right? So just so you know, if you
What
were about to
happens-
swear, say something deeply offensive, I just want to give you the heads up, which I'm sure you were, just letting you know that you might
Yeah,
want to
yeah,
hold
I
fire
wasn't,
on
but-
that for now.
Yeah,
so
if there was any
Easy
swearing
to
going
say.
on, it would have been swearing about my lack of technology and my inability to keep things updated like I should. So sorry, guys.
You are
Hey, it's
totally
all right.
in the clear. Yeah. Whilst we were just chatting, we were having a very important chat about Thanksgiving and whether that's a real holiday, which it isn't, and whether pigs in blankets are necessary Christmas food, which it is, but apparently it's not in America. Apparently that's more optional. But so
Yeah, that's two
Yeah,
two
go ahead.
strikes. Strike one. I think it's the most Christian of holidays. I've written on this. You know, the Presbyterian influence on the Congregationalists in America, the Puritans, they were super against liturgical holidays, but they loved Thanksgiving. They wanted days of Thanksgiving to be called throughout the year so that God's people can remember that all of our life is a response to grace. So I love it, and I think British people should do it, even if you don't have the rich history that we do. And secondly, is for pigs and blankets. If you can give thanks over that, more power to you, man.
Okay, so are they? Hold on, hold on. Are they the same thing in America? So for right, pigs and blankets, because this is something very important, right? Again, this is the kind of meaty content that our audience desires, and we should spend lots of time on it. Very quickly, for us, they're small sausages which are different from American sausages, wrapped in bacon. Is that what pigs and blankets are in the States, or are they a different thing? Because I don't know how anybody could have anything
No.
objectionable to say about that.
No, that sounds lovely. Ours are low quality sausages, basically baby hot dogs that are even worse than regular hot dogs that then get baked inside of a low quality attempt at a croissant. And so no, they're not great.
Okay. Okay, so this is where, so Winston Churchill once said that the Brits and the Americans are two people divided by a common language. So that's what we've just had here, where we are saying the same words but with different meanings. And therefore, that is why
That's
you
right.
rejected pigs and blankets. So if you take a decent quality sausage, now you guys, again, your sausages are very different and your bacon is very different, which I find, I don't know why, but that's just a thing. But if you take a sausage and wrap it in bacon and put it in the oven, very good, goes very nicely with turkey. It's a good deal, or with ham, or preferably with
So
toast.
people do that. We do that here. We just don't call it pigs and blankets. We call it something different. It's like and people make that as appetizers. So that's the disconnect is the language. Okay, I have a question before we get into our main topic here, real quick, Jamie. Are
Yeah.
you guys going to have a recall election?
No. It's not.
What are
No,
the
it
chances?
won't.
What are the chances? Okay,
0% chance that there will be an election, at least in the next couple of years. So, yeah, you're referring to, for those that don't know, the poll that got, or the petition, official petition, which you do actually have to do. You have to fill out a form to answer, and it got almost 3 million votes asking for another election. So, no, the purpose of signing it is not to actually get another election. It's to voice dissent against the current direction. It's to create internal party pressure, and could potentially lead to something like the removal of Keir Starmer as the leader of the Labour Party, because we don't vote for the Prime Minister here. We vote, it's a parliamentary rather than a presidential system. So no one voted for Keir Starmer as such, except for some constituents in his small region. He's just the leader of the Labour Party who won the election and won the most constituencies. So that's how we, elect prime ministers. So it could lead to that, but the Labour Party have a massive majority, and other than there being even with rioting in the streets, which there has been already, other than more, and probably things like the Bank of England. The Bank of England have a lot of power here, and they operate independently of the government. If they decide they're done, they could tank the economy. That could lead to it. But the petition will not cause that, but it does create pressure. So,
okay.
That's where we're at.
Then
Wonderful.
carry on
Well,
with your
great.
socialist ways.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, we didn't used to be. We did invent freedom, and you guys then, I accept you advanced on the concept, but it's British. It's a British concept, British common law, all of that stuff. Anyway, we should get into our discussion. Let me introduce our guest, who we've already chatted to, but haven't officially introduced. I am hoping for everybody this evening that our wonderful guest will give you something to think about, not only because his surname means ponder, or is ponder, which means something to think about, but that was a good joke. You get it, because it's a play on words. So
Yes.
Anyway, I'm very much hoping that by the end,
First
people
time
can
I've ever heard
say,
it.
yeah, people will be able to say that we really dug in to some meaty topics. Another one. There we
Strike
go.
2.
There we go. Yeah, well, it's a lot of strikes. 4 strikes thus far, because you gave me 2 earlier, so I am playing some other game at this point. Doug is teaching pastor at Remnant Church, Virginia, academic dean and professor of biblical studies at Grimke Seminary, and has also written Biblical Foundations of Church Planting as well. Which is that an internal? I was trying to find it because I was really interested. Is that like an internal document that's used, or is that sort of is that available to the wider public?
It was a chapter. Yeah, that's a great question.
Okay.
It was a chapter in a book. The North American Mission Board was working closely with the state of Virginia, the Baptists in the state of Virginia, to produce a church planting manual that had different chapters that would cover different topics. So they asked me to write the one on biblical foundations.
Very good. Fantastic. Wonderful. So we're delighted to have you here. How are you keeping? If you had you said you're having a tough time with technology. Other than that, you're doing well.
Yeah, doing great.
Wonderful. Good. We want to talk today, so that kind of pushing into your areas of expertise and asking some questions, and then Stephen, you'll be able to speak to this as well very easily as a pastor. So I think one of the things that has been very evident in the Christian church over the last few years has just been, I mean, we all know we've seen a decline of the church. We've seen a decline in church attendance in many areas, probably more prominent here in the United Kingdom than perhaps in America, but we still see some of those trends. And we've certainly seen certain denominations really collapse. I think a lot of that can be tied to the state of the leaders of churches. I think if we look around and go, where do we look for the problem? The leaders of churches is going to be a big part. So your pastors, your elders, your ministers, whatever your denomination wants to call that, that's going to be a big part of that. And that brings us into sort of the area of pastoral training and how we are raising up men to be controversial men for ministry, and you know what is happening there. So this is sort of your world, Doug. You live in this realm of training pastors. You're a pastor yourself. What do you think, you know, sort of broad brushstrokes, what do you think the issues are? What are we getting wrong when it comes to training and equipping men for the work of ministry?
Oh man, that's a huge question. Let me back up to where you started, just to prove that this is not really a new problem. Writing in the 1600s, Richard Baxter said, all churches either rise or fall as the ministry doth rise or fall, not in terms of riches or worldly grandeur, but in terms of its knowledge, ability, and zeal for the work. So this connection between the health of a church, the state of the church, and the state of the pastors who are leading the church is a well-established connection. You certainly see it in the New Testament, and then you see it throughout church history. So it's not like it's a new problem. It's just that once you have said, okay, yes, I agree, the state of the church is largely connected to the state of pastors, then you have to say, okay, well, what's going wrong with pastors? What sorts of things do we see? And one of the factors in this discussion is, are we training them in a way that actually prepares them to do the work that they've been called to do? And if we're not, then we have to answer that question, right? We have to say, well, what are we missing, right? And there's a lot there.
Yeah. So Richard Baxter sounds like the sort of 16th century version of John Maxwell. Everything rises and falls with the leadership, right there. That's basically what you're saying. He was the first megachurch guru. Is that what you're telling us?
Yeah, that's exactly.
Sounds like
right.
it.
Sounds like it to me. Yeah. So go ahead. So what are some of those issues then that you think in terms of, you know, I mean, when I think of our church leaders, it feels like there is a lack of conviction, a lack of courage, a lack of maybe even awareness of some of the battles that we're facing. I don't know. I mean, you might identify different issues. Feel free to identify and sort of go, right, this is where some of those failings lie. Yeah.
So, okay. There was a really interesting article that was written, I guess it was 15 years ago now, at the Gospel Coalition, which I found interesting for a lot of reasons. But the title of the article was, what one thing would you change about seminary? You know, if you could change one thing to address these problems that we're seeing, that we all see them, then the question was, what would you change to fix them? So the answers that were given were essentially a diagnosis and a prescription. Here's what's wrong, and then here's what we need to do differently to make it right. And what I found fascinating was, first, who they interviewed. So it was largely seminary presidents of these massive evangelical seminaries across North America, and professors as well. And if you go and you read the article, it's still available at TGC. What you'll see is almost all of the answers are more or less something of the same. They're answers like, you know, we need to do a better job with integration, you know, cross-pollinating this course, and we need to do a better job with, teaching this subject, which is underemphasized. They're very, very similar until you get to the last one. The last answer was the man who spoke with such bravery and clarity and conviction that as I read this article, I find myself almost skimming it, because everything that was being said was mostly banal and trite and true, maybe as far as it goes, but just didn't seem to be striking the diagnosis at an accurate or precise level. Until you get to Richard Pratt. Let me read you what he says. Not all of it, but part of it. He's fantastic. He said he used to be a professor at RTS Jackson. He served there for over 2 decades. And he says, if I were a king and could wave my magic scepter, I would radically change the basic agenda of seminary. After 22 years of teaching in seminary, I slowly began to realize we are not preparing the kinds of leaders that evangelical churches need. Then he goes on to say, let's face it, we got lots of problems. And he mentions all the problems that we're seeing, the kinds of decline that we see, the kinds of moral failure at the pastorate that we see, all the things you just mentioned. Then he lays the axe to the root of the tree. He says, simply put, the agenda of evangelical seminaries is set primarily by scholars. Professors decide how students spend their time. They determine student priorities. They set the pace. And guess what? Scholars' agendas seldom match the needs of the church. Can you imagine what kind of soldiers our nation would have if basic military training amounted to reading books, listening to lectures, writing papers, and taking exams? We'd have dead soldiers. The first time a bullet whizzed past their heads on the battlefield, they'd panic. The first explosion they saw would send them running. So what is basic training for the military? Recruits learn the information they need to know. Yes, but that's a relatively small part of their preparation. Most of the basic training is devoted to battle simulation. Recruits are put through harrowing emotional and physical stress. They crawl under live bullet fire. They practice hand-to-hand combat. And so if I could wave a magic scepter and change seminary today, I'd turn it into a grueling physical and spiritual experience. I'd find ways to reach academic goals more quickly and effectively, and then devote most of the curriculum to supervised battle simulation. I'd put these students through endless hours of hands-on service to the sick and the dying, to dangerous evangelism, to frequent preaching and teaching of the scriptures, and days on end of fasting and prayer. In other words, just to summarize all that, Pratt argues, and I think he's right, our seminary training today is better suited to produce men who know how to write research papers than to produce pastors who can lead the charge against the gates of hell.
Wow, that's fire. I love that. That's very good.
It's great.
Yeah, so true. Stephen, I'm going to bring you in here, but I'll give a little bit of my experience as well in this regard. So one of the things that I did, so whenever I felt a call to ministry at 17 years of age, and I was in my final year of school and was weighing up then options, and the kind of natural options that were available locally were, a couple of seminaries that were, good academically and, would have got some sound stuff. But the thing that really I found as a 17-year-old, and I was an idiot at 17, so don't take 17-year-old me as a great example, but the thing that did turn me off was that none of the people doing the teaching were involved in anything like what I wanted to do. They were just academics who weren't doing the stuff, and I wanted to be somewhere where the stuff was being done. I ended up going to a Bible college over in Sweden that had been involved in planting, hundreds of churches. It was unaccredited, so it was less academic, and that has some downsides. So there was work to be done in that regard, but it was very countercultural. So there was courage, and there was a lot of practical ministry focus. Like there was a requirement of you will go and do street evangelism. That will happen. You are going on a mission trip on your own that you will organize with some other people, and we'll connect you with a few folks, but you're getting out there and going to whatever. And that for me was really, really helpful. And those are the things I look back on as being helpful. Stephen, your path into ministry, I know a bit of it in terms of the context in which you grew up and which you got started. How does that play into that? Because so I don't know if we've discussed this, if you have done seminary, but I know you were very involved in practical ministry from an early age. So how did that look like? Does that reflect some of what Doug's saying there as being sort of part of the need? And did you find some of that stuff beneficial?
Yeah. Great questions. So when Doug was explaining kind of the lay of the land there, it made me think about asking Doge, asking the bureaucrats what needs to be changed in the government. You're going to get the worst answers in the world. Why? Because they have a vested interest in protecting the institutions and the establishments that are funding them, that are giving them an easy life, and that will buy into the narrative that they're selling. Right. And so it's these seminary professors and people who are making great incomes and have tenure and doing all of this I'm talking by and large here. Obviously, there's exceptions who can carry on the weight of, oh, we're doing this important work and important ministry work. And, and the system is good and all of that kind of stuff. So you're going to get the worst answers on what needs to change when you ask those questions to those people. I think the better question would be to ask everyday saints and people that are actually doing ministry, what needs to change in your pastor? Or pastor, what needs to change in your training to make you good at this job? You're going to arrive at much better answers to the true question than asking what's wrong with seminary. The bottom line is, what's wrong with seminary? Well, it's not equipping pastors to actually do the work of ministry. That's the problem. And so let's sit back then and go, how do we begin to address that problem? Now, should seminary be a part of it? Well, certainly theological training should be a part of it. There should certainly be a foundation of good, solid doctrine that we should expect from people that are standing in front of people proclaiming the word and overseers of people's souls. So I think there's a great conversation to have on what level of doctrinal and theological training should be expected. Okay. I hesitate to use the word required because I think that context actually does matter drastically in this. I think that your pastor needs to be, there should be a healthy expectation that your pastor is more educated than the average person in the congregation that they're pastoring, able to lead them down a path that is biblically faithful, certainly, and challenging to the people that you have in your congregation. I think of that line, right? If there's confusion in the pulpit, there's going to be madness in the pews or something like that. I'm kind of butchering it, but right, the pastor needs to have a basic foundation and a more established foundation than the person they're pastoring. Now, I think we could get into the realities of modern American ministry, and that leads into my background, the things that were necessary for me to be able to do ministry effectively, and the different paths that people can get there in today's world. I think there's different expectations when you walk into denominational churches versus non-denominational churches, or other modern style churches. You're going to have different expectations. And so talking about what that or how that can look. I think the other thing we have to ask is, what impact has the I'll call it the Big Eva establishment had on church pastoral training over the last few years, over the last few decades? And then let's ask, what problems has that created? And then what benefits has that created, so that maybe we can learn going into the future? So that would be my general setup here in this conversation.
So there's an analogy that I have used that I think is very helpful. I don't know how well it'll translate to your context, Jamie, because I'm not sure how your country educates physicians, right? Doctors of medicine. But in the US, somebody who is training has a degree choice to make that's entirely connected to what they see themselves doing after they graduate. In the US, the people we call doctors normally have a doctorate of medicine, an MD. But there is a PhD in medicine, and it's a very different degree that's tailored for a very different career. Someone who is practicing medicine gets an MD, and then they're released as a doctor to go and practice medicine on sick people to help them get better. But someone who has a PhD in medicine is mostly specializing in research and writing. They are in a lab somewhere, using a microscope, figuring out weird things about diseases that can help make the practitioners better at their jobs. And I think it's very helpful, because when we come to thinking about seminary education, it's almost like what has happened is the equivalent of the PhD in medicine has swallowed up the the need for a degree or even a format of training that's exclusively for practitioners. I actually saw this in one of the upper level master's courses that I took. I have a couple master's degrees, doctorate, and one of the master's degrees that I took an upper level course, wanted to be challenged, wanted to be equipped. There were 14 men in the class. It was a much smaller class. We had a lot of opportunity for engagement. And at one point, the professor was perplexed because the questions he was getting were so far removed from the life and the ministry of the church. And he said, out of curiosity, how many of you are thinking that you want to go on when you graduate from seminary to be a pastor? It was just me, my friend James, who now teaches with me in our church, and one other man. 11 out of 14 of the men in this upper level seminary course were thinking, I want to go on to be essentially the theological equivalent of a PhD in medicine. And I would argue that's almost exactly upside down from what we need. What we really need are a huge number of men who say, yeah, being a practitioner is a glorious thing. And I want the kind of education that will help me do that. But when seminary has been swallowed up by whether the agenda of the professors or students who are clamoring for the wrong kinds of clout, status, position, or whatever, then you end up with programs that now give those guys what they're looking for, which is helping produce the next generation of scholars. But the truth is, you don't need that many. You need some scholars. Like, I'm really glad D.A. Carson exists and has written the stuff he's written. But in that class of 14, there were 0 future D.A. Carsons. And even if there were one, there's just one, right? There's certainly not 11. And so you see how this problem kind of takes shape over time, and you end up with a whole degree that almost gets co-opted by the wrong interests and ends up serving not the needs of the church, but the needs of the academy in ways that very rarely trickle down to the actual needs of the people who are in the pews.
That's very interesting. Yeah, no, I definitely that resonates. I've seen that. I've seen that with other folks that have done seminary with a view to ministry and struggled with that. Okay, so let's drill in just a wee tiny bit further as to what you feel the sort of needs are and where it's being missed in detail. So my take on this, and you feel free to correct me because I might be wrong. I'm certainly very open to being wrong. But I feel that, let me put a couple of things together. One of the things I see is I do see that we have a lot of very smart people who seem to shy away from a lot of the battles that we're facing. And on the contrary, it's kind of that midwit graph. You know, that one, the meme, you know, like there's dumb people who can take a stand and actually get it pretty much right. And I think a lot of the time it's like, you know, when I think about the people that I'm interacting with locally, it's often the sort of working class missionary pastor who's in a little, you know, estate. You know, this is not an academic guy, you know, smart, not dumb by any means, but, you know, just is not sort of attempting to be an academic. He's taking the stand. The ones who are trying to be all fancy, they're the ones that actually avoid it. So putting that together with something that I probably haven't researched enough, but I've heard enough people say that it sounds very plausible, which is this idea that education used to be focused primarily on virtue, and now it is more focused on information. Is the problem then primarily, as you would see it, is it an information problem that they're getting the wrong information that isn't relevant, or is it a failure to cultivate the kind of character necessary for ministry, or is it both? And if so, we can go a little bit further.
Sure. I mean, I think the way you've already framed the question, if you were a lawyer, or excuse me, what do you call them? Barristers?
Well, it depends. We have lawyers and solicitors and barristers. They do different things, but barristers, the ones in court. Yeah.
Well, in the American court system, if you were a lawyer and you asked the question that you just asked, you would get flagged by the judge or the opposing attorney for it being a leading question. But I actually like the way you framed it, because you're trying to help people see already. It's kind of evident what the problem is. But let me just point to an unlikely source of help on this. There was a philosopher, naturalist, not a Christian, named E.O. Wilson. He passed away a number of years ago. And he said at some point in the 90s, he said, the world is drowning in information while starving for wisdom. The world henceforth will be run by people who can put the right information together in the right ways, think critically about it, and make important choices wisely. And so information is part of the equation here. Of course it is. We have to know some things, right? Paul tells Timothy to watch his life and doctrine. So teaching matters a lot. However, it's never been easier to get the right information in some ways today than at any point in history. Somebody told me that Calvin had 350 books in his library. And I know people who have 10 times that number. So I feel the weight of the moment that we live in, the wisdom, what E.O. Wilson says when he says, we're drowning in information. That's not our problem. We're starving for other things like wisdom. Or you mentioned courage. And that's huge. Remember Acts 4:13? It was not the smarts of the apostles that made them stand out as having been with Jesus. In fact, it's explicitly said that when the Pharisees saw that they were ordinary, uneducated men and saw their boldness, then they perceived that they had been with Jesus, Acts 4:13. And so there's something really amazing and interesting going on. Did those guys receive an education? Yes, they had been with Jesus every day for 3 years and some change. You can't buy an education like that. That's amazing. And yet, it wasn't education according to the standards of the world, but it did give them what they needed to be the kind of men that the Lord uses to lead his church. And part of what it gave them was the willingness to take a stand when it cost them something. And I don't know how you're going to get that purely from writing papers with footnotes and very lengthy bibliographies that are perfectly formatted. Now, I'm not anti any of that. I require guys to write some papers in my classes, but I don't stuff my classes with those sorts of things because I recognize at the end of the day, I need this guy to actually believe what he's writing, and I need him to practice it. And that means I need the pastor in his church to be looking over his shoulder and making sure this guy's not a hypocrite. You know, I mean, there's another way to say this. One more illustration pops into my mind. Who knows more about forgiveness, Christian forgiveness? Is it the man who can write an article for the Journal of Evangelical Theology about the early, Second Temple Judaism view of forgiveness and how that might inform Matthew's theology in Matthew 5? Or is it the guy who reads Jesus's words and it says, if you do not forgive your brothers, neither will your Father in heaven forgive you. So leave your gift knows a mountain more. Somebody who could write an incredibly academic essay.
Doug, we're losing you a wee bit, or is it just me, Stephen? Or
No, yeah, we're losing Doug. I think he's saying
so
intelligent things though, which is so tragic.
He was saying great things. Yeah, I know. We lost him. He'll come back in. I'm sure he'll get back in.
Pop in.
That's it. That's all good stuff. Talk to me. Yeah, what were you going to say there, Stephen? Go ahead.
Well, I think he was saying some things that reminded me of Friedman's failure to nerve, which is another way of saying that what we need is not a whole bunch more information, but we need the courage and the ability to actually act decisively on the information that we're receiving. So I think there's two ways of looking at the question that you're asking today. One is, what is wrong with seminary? That is a good question. Doug is going to be able to answer that question really, really well. Hey, Doug, welcome back.
So sorry, guys. I switched over to a different Wi-Fi because I saw that it said it needed to reconnect. So again, what did I say earlier about me and technology? Just chalk it up.
You said you were talking about forgiveness, which I think this is a prime example of the ability to do so towards your Wi-Fi router, and I think that this is you've just given us a working example. Yeah. So talk to me a little bit. Sorry, this isn't something we've mentioned, but you'll be able to speak to it well, and we can talk more because I think your model at Grimke is one that I really like. But how do you do that? You guys have set this up with that in mind. That you're training pastors. This is for pastors. This is for people that want to go into ministry. What are the sort of big key things that you're saying we are doing this very distinctly differently from an average seminary, one of those big name ones that a lot of people would know and think of?
Yeah, so let me point back to that TGC article I mentioned. One of the things that D.A. Carson said was that we would find a way, that what he would change about seminary is he would find a way to make local church pastors a meaningful part of seminary education. And then as soon as he said this, which was like, yes, he then said, but that's impractical. It's a wish dream. It'll never happen. To which we said, who says? Who says that's a wish dream? Who says that's impractical? Let's do it. So we thought, let's actually make a seminary that exists to serve churches and makes the pastor in that church a meaningful part of pastoral training. So there are multiple pieces here to what that looks like. Number one is we don't have a model that requires a man to move across the country in order to come and be part of our school. We use intensives so that a man who works a full-time job. Many of our students, we have about 130 students now, and many of our students are already in either full-time ministry or they work a full-time job, they're bivocational. And so we've set up intensives so that they can come in on a Monday night, go to class Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, go home Thursday night, just use a couple weeks of vacation. They come in twice a semester. The big idea is they can stay in their local context under the supervision of these pastors who already know them well and are overseeing their growth and their development as a man, as a husband, as a father, as a prospective elder, these kinds of things. That's the first part. The second part is we won't even admit a guy to the seminary who doesn't have the full support of the men in his church. And I know a lot of schools do this on paper, but they don't, not in practice. There was a young man who was part of our church 10 years ago, and everybody with a wit of discernment could see that this guy's trajectory was a deeply unhealthy one. He was leaving a very bad, independent, fundamentalist, angry, like unorthodox church. So praise God for that. The problem is he looked at our church as a waypoint toward a more liberal move. And we saw these signs. So when he said he wanted to go to seminary, he applied to one of our alma maters, one of the schools that some of the pastors that I serve with had gone to. And we have to fill out these letters of recommendation. And both me and another man wrote, I would not take this man. It would be detrimental to his soul and whatever church he ends up in. And then I talked to my other pastor who wrote one independently for me. And I said, what did you say, man? I felt bad, but this is what I had to say. Based on everything I see in this man's life, my conscience would not let me recommend him. And he wrote an even stronger letter of critique and warning not to admit him. And they took him anyway. And today the guy's not in the faith. He and his wife have 3 pugs, no children, and no love for Jesus. And I'm like, look, this kind of thing is avoidable. So we don't take a man who isn't actually supported by his church with a full-throated support that would include a little bit of finances. Put your money where your mouth is. If you actually think that these men are potential elder candidates, then help them get what God says they need, right? So that's another piece. And then the third and final piece is, in all of our classes, we're teaching with a view to pastoral ministry. It's the MD, not the PhD in medicine. So all of our lectures are structured in that way. And we require all of our students to have some kind of formal internship or coaching relationship, if they're already a pastor, where a necessary part of their education is for the 2, 3, or 4 years that they're with us, they are in an actual relationship with some pastor figure in their life who is talking with them about what they're learning and supervising how they're putting these things into practice. So we basically took everything that D.A. Carson said he thinks seminaries need, but that it's impractical to do. And we said, let's find a way to actually do it, because I think that's biblical. 2 Timothy 2:2, right? Paul says to Timothy, what you have seen and heard in me, right? Pass these things on to faithful men who are able to teach others also. And we just set up a model and a curriculum that would enable us to do exactly that.
Very good. Stephen, you're bound to have
Doug, I have a
thoughts on
question.
that. I mean, you guys are doing, go ahead. Yep.
Yeah. So I think there's there's the obvious question about education and what's wrong with education in general. Then you're going to move more specifically what's wrong with pastoral training. And so I think you're identifying both of those problems and trying to create a strategy. Generally speaking, Doug, the pastors that are going to come through your system and end up, or I'm sorry, the individuals that are going to end up pastors or elders in churches, what style type of church, generally speaking, are they going to find themselves in? I'm curious.
Sure. I guess I'm not exactly sure what you mean by style. Do you mean like low church, high church? Do you mean denomination?
Yep, all of the above.
It's probably similar to what most of our professors are. We have professors from 4 or 5 different denominations, but what we all have in common is we all have historically Orthodox, Protestant, evangelical convictions. And then on top of all of that, we have a deep love for a church-centered understanding of the Christian life. And so most of the men who come to us have similar convictions. Certainly they do by the time they graduate, but before even they attend. And a lot of them will end up in what you would probably call low church, evangelical, theologically conservative churches that we hope are now better equipped to speak with conviction, with clarity, and with courage to the specific issues that are assaulting the church in this day and age.
Okay, so one of the reasons I was kind of bringing that up, because I think we have to ask ourselves when we talk about seminary pastoral training, who's doing it and to what end are they trying to accomplish? And I think that's a huge part of this, because as I look at the liberal mainlines, I mean, I would say by and large, they're getting what they desire. They're getting elitists who are going to lead churches that are being funded by, these massive endowments, and they don't even break even on a monthly basis or an annual basis. And so they're reproducing what it is that they desire to produce. Okay, let's swing all the way back over to the other side. Jamie made a joke about John Maxwell earlier. In my head, I was crediting that statement to Bill Hybels. Everything rises and falls on leadership, right? We all heard it for
I thought it may have been Drucker. I wasn't sure. It's one of the 3, definitely. It's the Holy Trinity.
They're basically the same
gurus.
person. Yeah. Yeah. And in that world, they were trying to produce, right, the outcome that they intended, which was people being able to lead mega church movements of, fastly growing large churches that I would argue led to the part of the decline of the American church that we're experiencing today. And so during this kind of rise of the megachurch movement, the kind of the shepherd, preacher, leader context, which is how I always look at the role of pastor, you have to do those 3 things: shepherd, preach, and lead. But during the rise of the megachurch movement, and then many people kind of ran toward this, we threw the shepherd out completely and basically said,
Sure,
we'll reserve that to the old guys, or we'll just farm it out to secular therapists. Right, which I think is a big problem that we're still reaping the consequences of that today.
100%.
Preaching became, well, it's not really preaching; it's public speaking, and it's geared toward church. I mean, look at the great books, right? John Maxwell had one on communicating. Andy Stanley had one called Communicating for
Change.
A change or whatever. Yeah,
it's a good book on communication.
And so, what was the point? It is. But the point was to drive an organization forward with kind of this loose connection to the Christian faith. Okay, so then leadership became most important. And it wasn't necessarily church leadership, it was organizational leadership. And so now we have this kind of highly bastardized picture of what a pastor is. This has kind of worked its way entirely through the Big Eva, mega church movement. I think we're still recovering from some of that, but 2 things. In our recovery, 1, we still have lots of pastors that was their training. And so the reality of the American church is these people are pastoring our churches. Secondly, there are now descendants of that rising through the ranks. And so how do we serve both of those groups of people, knowing that they're shooting for a different target than the main lines, or even people like yourself, Doug, that have stepped in and said, you guys are correcting the mainline problem. I really highly appreciate that. I think it's super important. I'm also really concerned about the other half of evangelicalism living in the world that I've just talked about.
Sure. So we have, we started 5.5 years ago. Our first class was 34 students, which, praise God. I mean, when you start a new school,
that's a great first year.
That's a great first class, man.
It's amazing.
You can't have accreditation in America out of the gates. So we were starting with one hand tied behind our backs, and we live in America, which has seminaries. Some of them are the size of small cities, and so we have all these things. And so to even have 34, we were thankful to God for that. But as we have grown, what we have found is several things have happened. There are men who come to us from there was one man who came to us from a church of 20,000 people. That would certainly be in the vein of what you're talking about, Steven. But we've got other guys
absolutely
who come from inner city churches, and other guys who serve in very remote rural contexts. So we really do have a diversity of students from different backgrounds. But what they all have in common is they understand that our core commitments, our kind of defining values. I don't love that word, but we have doctrines, and then the values that emerge from that would be everything we do is founded on the scriptures. Everything we do is centered on the church, and everything we do is with a view to that connection you were talking about, Jamie, at the beginning, of the health of that church is going to rise and fall on the health and the state of the pastors who lead them. So let's get you to be the kind of man that you need to be in order to lead churches where they need to go.
Very good. Sorry, Stephen, do you want to add something to that? Did I cut you off?
Well, no, yeah, I think Doug, I want to applaud you guys for what you've done. I mean, we started a college here. It's not a seminary. It's supposed to be an undergrad that's going to be a rival to state colleges in the area. It's a difficult process, and it's also hard to attract students early on because you have zero credibility. So I greatly applaud what you're doing. I think there needs to be a massive pendulum shift away from how the main lines are running their denominations right now. And upstarts like yours is a huge part of shifting the needle. We say this often at Clear Truth. We will not actually win conservatism, evangelicalism in our culture until we change the pastorate. And that is the current pastorate and the next generation of pastors. If we keep losing the pastors, we'll just lose more of the flock underneath, and we have zero chance of winning. So your efforts are, they're welcome. Awesome job. Thank you. Whatever we can do to send people to you, I mean, that's a huge win, because this has to happen. I think... Yeah. Jamie, I don't know where you're planning on taking this conversation, but I think there's a valid conversation to have. Well, great.
I was going to do the joke section. Joke section's coming up. So, Stephen, you keep rolling. Okay. That's fine, because the joke section will come.
So I think one of the things that I'd like after the joke section, let's have a conversation about this, because I think until we restore the pastoral role as shepherd, preacher, and leader, all three of those things, and we begin to shift that mindset again in people, we're going to, I think we're going to keep falling off some of these airs that we have arrived at. The pastorate got changed, at least from the mega church angle. And I would say from the denominational angle, maybe it's just too heavy on the intellectual, on the preaching side, and it's forgotten the shepherd and the organizational side, which is where I often see failures happening in that area. So
yeah,
that's my.
Well, we will get into that now. No, absolutely, I will. Doug, I don't know if you've seen this show. We are very proud on this show to have. We don't have real sponsors, but we are proud to have fake sponsors. And our fake sponsor, it's slightly awkward this week because it's another seminary. But we're proud to be sponsored this show by Ivory Tower Seminary. If you're tired of studying the Bible in a way that impacts the real lives of anyone that you know in real life, as opposed to 6 guys that you know from Twitter, and you would like to do theology in the most detached, superior manner possible, then look no further than Ivory Tower Seminary. At Ivory Tower Seminary, our world-class instructors include a guy who refuses to speak anything other than Koine Greek, the Tin Man, because he has no heart, and N.T. Wright, and together they will teach you how to say things that sound smart but mean very little. The course on abstract hermeneutics, how to preach with disdain for your hearers, is sure to help you cultivate the kind of theological smugness only years of detached learning can provide. For the simple price of just 25,000 Phoenician shekels, and if you don't know how much that is, you're not welcome, our academics who aren't even church members will tell you everything wrong with the way everyone else does church. And in our Smug Scholars package, you can get access to a private online forum where everyone can pretend to spot chiasms that aren't really there, and people will act like they care. And once again, if you don't know what a chiasm is, you're also not welcome, and you're probably not even a Christian. So why not send your application on vellum parchment and register for Ivory Tower Seminary today? Ivory Tower Seminary, Semper Nerderanda. There we go.
That's fantastic.
So that's... yeah, it's a bit awkward to have another seminary advertising whenever you're talking about yours.
You're too good at that. You're too good. That's amazing.
He really is. It's a little scary.
Well,
as I said, most of my prep for this is this stuff. It's just that bit.
It's writing the jokes. Yeah.
Well, okay, so I don't want to kill a good joke because it's a great joke, but obviously the reason that it works, you know, this is like comedy 101. You don't explain why a joke works, but I want to do this to shift it into something serious. The reason that joke works so well is you obviously have a great feel for some of the problems that are going on. And there was a German scholar named Helmut Thielicke who wrote a book called A Little Exercise for Young Theologians back in 1962. And he warns actually against some of the things you're talking about. The irony is the denomination he was part of has gone the way of mainliners, so they just didn't listen to him. But here's what he says. Truth seduces us very easily into a kind of joy of possession. I have comprehended this and that. I have learned and understood it. Knowledge is power. I am therefore more than the other man who does not know this and that. And he says, and in the possession of this truth, such a man despises, of course, in the most sublime way, the very people who have, as simple Christians, learned to pray to the Savior of sinners. This disdain is a real spiritual disease. It lies in the conflict of truth and love, and this conflict is precisely the disease of theologians. I love that. I think he's got his finger on the pulse. He recognizes that something happens when a man goes off to seminary, and if he comes home and actually disdains the people that he's been called to serve or shepherd wherever he is, then something wrong has happened here. He has learned to think of knowledge in all the wrong ways, the kinds of ways that Paul says it can puff up, instead of seeing himself as a sharper instrument to lead these people in the mission that the Lord has given to his church.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it is a real problem, and we do see a lot of that of guys go to Bible college, go to seminary, whatever it might be, and they come back and, I mean, they've learned plenty, but there is that period of just, you need to just shut up for a bit and be humble and get involved and stack chairs again. Like, you need to do that for a little bit, almost just to sort of recognize what this is about. And rather than sort of come back and try and take over. No, it's a real issue. Yeah, so Stephen, you want to talk about, so you had your 3 things of, as you've described it, sort of shepherd, preacher, leader. Is that's your 3 that you kind of see are is that, am I right? I've got the right 3 there?
Yeah. Yeah, you do. And I always say this is the context of actually doing the job. You have to be good at all 3 of these things. If you want to pastor, you have to be able to shepherd, you have to be able to preach, and you have to be able to lead. Those are the functions of the role itself. And as I look at the different lanes of evangelicalism, they tend to ignore 1 or 2 of the 3 and focus really heavily on 1 or 2 of them to the detriment of the other, which creates, statistically, Doug, I don't know if you ever heard this stat. It was popular in the 2010s, that you were more likely to be leading a failing church if you had graduated seminary.
That's brutal.
Ever heard that stat?
Wow.
No,
Wow.
but I understand where it comes from, and as you say it, I think that should be the opposite. It should be the opposite.
Yeah, you would think. Yeah, it's not doing what it's meant to do, right? I would actually say here, most theological education in the UK does none of the three. I would say that it's largely focused on, so most mainline teaching here is, or at least what I see the fruit of it being is, denominational capture is essentially the goal. That's what it's about. It's about corruption of the denomination. And so there's no leadership, there's no shepherding, there's no preaching. It's climb the ranks to become a bishop, take over the denomination, wear it as a skin suit. That's essentially what happens, which is probably the worst case scenario, but probably has been reflected in some of the mainline denominations in the States as well. So Doug, yeah, well, I mean, obviously, preaching is going to be a big part of that. By lead, Stephen, to throw a question to Doug, then do you mean to distinguish that from shepherding? Because obviously it's hard to shepherd without leading, but I think by shepherding, what you're sort of describing there is the interpersonal, the pastoral, the hospital, the grieving, the encouragement, the young guy who needs, a slap around the head, leading being the sort of business, organizational, strategic side. Is that what you mean by that?
So in our college, I teach a course called Shepherd, Preacher, Leader. And in that course, I spent 5 weeks on each of them. And here's our definition of a leader. I'll give it to you. A person who serves others by setting an example, establishing core values, casting vision, managing resources, building a team, developing systems, and training and motivating others toward the end of a mission. So it's the organizational function of leading a church. And the irony, so growing up in the megachurch movement, the irony was always the people who hated us had strong doctrine, and which was something I was envious of. And so I had to go back and do self-study on my own to have a stronger foundation. But they would always throw shade, and these were typically coming from people who were pastoring churches. I'm just speaking in generalities here in statistics, generally of churches 100 and under, right? Now, at this point in time, I was working at a church of 10,000. So the question here is not what is right or wrong. The question is this. The reality of the world, this is not even a question. The reality of the world is we have people pastoring. It is happening. It's not a question of what should be. What is right now. These are the people pastoring Americans. And so with that in mind, how do we create a better system? And how do we serve pastors in those roles so that the pastoring will be better? I think that's a really important question. And having better, more realistic seminaries like what Doug is doing is great. But also saying, how do we retrain the current pastorate, I think is really important too. Because the reality is, many people, and statistically speaking, if you go back to that statistic I pointed out earlier, the people who are pastoring the largest congregations, maybe not like the 30,000 person churches, but the 500, 1,000, 1,500, they don't have seminary degrees. They don't. And they're training a generation of people not to have either because they didn't either.
Right.
Yeah. Doug, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's huge. I think part of what needs to happen there is recasting a vision for what the pastor should be. And only after you have a clear conception of who is a pastor, what is he called to be and to do, can you then ask the question, what kind of training is necessary to become that kind of man? And so some of those people might say, my goodness, I am a pastor. I don't have this education. I do have 10,000 people. Is that what you said, Stephen? Your church was 10,000 at that time, who are looking to me for spiritual guidance. I am the shepherd of their souls. But you're saying, am I doing a good job at this? And if I'm not, what things am I missing? And for many of those men, it may be that they don't even know what they're missing because they still don't have a clear view of what a pastor is supposed to be and do. Or others of them may say, I know what I'm missing, I just don't know how to get it. And so the number of men we have in our seminary who are already pastors is very high. At least a third of the 130 are already pastors who have actually said, I realize that I have already given everybody what I've got, and I can't lead them somewhere I've never gone. And I can't give them what I do not have. I need further training, further sharpening. And I'm so thankful for these men. Think about how humble it is to already be a pastor. And instead of thinking, I have arrived, these men think, I need help. And then they've come to us for that kind of help. Love those guys. And it changes even our classroom dynamic. We don't have endless debates about Calvinism and Arminianism. I mean, we have discussions about these things. We teach what the scriptures say, but all of it is with a view to what do you need to know so that you can speak to the people who are in front of you and lead them in the direction that God says they need to go. And it just changes the whole, as I said, the whole dynamic of how the classes have taken shape and what kinds of things we talk about and what kinds of things we don't talk about. And it's been great so far.
Awesome. Love it. Let me ask one sort of final question. We're actually past our time already, but we'll ask you one sort of closer here. Okay, so let's say you've had someone who has come through, your seminary program, whichever one you pick the one. Yeah, I know you have a few on offer, but let's say they do whatever your standard course is that you think would be most relevant for a pastor, and they've been part of their local church. What does that guy look like at the end? What is that? You said, right, you've got this vision of what you think a pastor should be. What's a pastor in the eyes of Grimke?
Yes, it's great. There's several things that I would say in response to that. The first is that he knows that all ministry, all of it, pastoral ministry, every other kind of ministry in the church, is ultimately about God. Ministry is about God. It's not just about, and I mean, this speaks to some of the megachurch stuff you were talking about a moment ago, Stephen, but it's not just about doing a good job holding a service, doing a good job managing people, doing a good job handling finances. Ministry is about God. I mean, I want all of my students to know that the education that they have received is valuable, even if they break their neck on the way up onto the stage to receive their diploma, because we've tried to give them the kind of training that helps them become better followers of Jesus. And that training isn't wasted, even if that man never serves another day in the church, ever. I mean, that's radical, right? But I believe that. We want to give them the kind of education that shapes their souls so that, Lord willing, if they do have 20, 30, 40 more years of ministry in the church, they will never get so good at feeding other people while starving themselves. They will never shepherd other people's souls without forgetting the shepherd of an overseer of their own soul. They will never get to a place where they are so good at knowing systems and what works, but forget that the whole point of all those systems is that disciples are being made. Converts are happening. People are being led to worship God. So a big part of it is we want the kind of men who come through to be men who know God, not in a theoretical way, but in a deep, real, vital, transformative, personal way that actually has helped them become a better follower of Jesus. Because at the end of the day, Paul says, what? Follow me as I follow Christ. Imitate me as I imitate Christ. So they need to be the kind of man who can say that and that people will actually follow. Right? Hebrews 13:7 says, remember your leaders who spoke the word of God to you. Consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith. So they have to be the kind of man who has a life, a faith, a doctrine that's worthy of imitation. And that actually is something that then will get into how they preach, how they shepherd, how they lead, that they're doing all these things with a clear sense that all of this is for the Lord, not just in name only, but really. And they have become the kind of man who can actually do those things in ways that call other people to say, get in line behind me and let's charge the gates of Hades together.
Amen. Wonderful. Well, we pray and believe for a generation of church leaders like that. And I agree. I think if we get people that do that, the rest will hopefully, by the grace of God, fall into place over time as they pursue His wisdom and leading and guidance and everything. So I'll give both you guys actually a chance to plug your. I know you said, Stephen, you go to school. You can plug it too. Actually, you go first, and then Doug will come to you, and you can plug Grimkey, because I know you guys have got a new thing opened up already here in Europe. But Stephen, you can give a quick shout out for your school. Why not?
Yeah, fantastic. First, Doug, thank you. I love the work that you guys are doing. I think it's hugely important right now. And without a transition in the way we train pastors, like I said earlier, we will not win again. So this is massively important work. And it's encouraging to hear what you guys are doing. Where we're at, we started an undergrad program, Revere Bible College. We're in the process of earning our accreditation. We just signed an articulation agreement with Southeastern University, so all of our classes now, they accepted every one of them, so everyone is now automatically can be enrolled into an SEU program, which is like a halfway house for us as we continue to earn our own accreditation, which we're about 2 years out on. So if you're an 18 to 24-year-old looking for the best education for the dollar you can possibly get, go to Revere Bible College, and we'd love to begin a conversation with you on how we can train you up for not just a life of ministry, but a life of entrepreneurialism, a life of godly faithfulness, and maybe a life of ministry. But I really think that's only about a third of the students that we're serving right now. So come and join us, and we'll get you started in the fall of 2025. I want to end with this, and then we'll kick it over to Doug. I think one of the things we have to remind ourselves of is that the people that are in ministry need to be reminded of two really important things. It starts with a deep, passionate love for Christ as an individual that has to then be translated into a deep love for people. And if you forget those two things, you don't want to be in ministry. You want to be in academia, or you want to be in organizational leadership. Ministry starts with a deep love for Christ and a deep love for people.
Amen. Amen. Doug, tell us about Grimkey. Where can people register, find out more, etc.?
Yeah, well, two things. One, thanks for having me, guys. It's been a joy to speak with you about things that are near and dear to my heart. Second, you should have let me go first, because Steven's elevator pitch was wonderfully concise. It was. I'm ready to go to college again, and you should have let me go first so that you get to end on a strong note. But yeah, I would just say to any pastor or who's already serving but feels a need for the kind of things we've talked about today, even if they already have a degree, we have additional degrees. We have a lot of men who come to us, they already have one, and they're saying, I'm here to get what I know that I need, but I didn't receive in the last place that I received training. So anyone who's thinking about being a pastor, who already is a pastor but feels like they need more, I would love for them to check out what we offer. They can get more information at grimkeyseminary.org. Grimkey is Grimke. It's named after a man who pastored not far from us for 50 years in the same church. He was a great model of a man who loved the church and stayed in the church for the duration of his life in ministry. It very much kind of captures the heart of what we're about. So I would love for people to check out the programs that we offer. And we'd be happy to talk with them further about how we can be a service to them, a blessing to them as they continue to bless and serve the people that God has entrusted to their care.
Amen.
Hey,
and
Doug,
also
where are you guys
available
at? I'm
in
so curious.
Europe as well.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I should have
Richmond.
mentioned that. So we're in Richmond, Virginia. It's where my church is. And we have a couple buildings, and one of the larger of the two host all the seminary classes for those intensives while guys are here. But we have students currently from 35 different states in the U.S. And then we just started another location in Liverpool in the United Kingdom. And the unofficial motto of our school is pastors training pastors. So the ability for us to have students who are coming from all over the country is largely because that intensive format enables guys to stay in their local church, keep serving, keep learning, and sitting under the teaching and the supervision of whoever their current pastor is, but then come to us for additional specialized theological education, but not from, what did you call it, Ivory Tower Seminary? But from
Ivory Tower Seminary. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, not from that, but from guys who are pastors and have pastoral experience. And most of us are still pastoring. And so everything we do and we teach is kind of run through that lens to help the guys that we're training be more of what we think a pastor should be.
Very good. Fantastic.
Beautiful.
Wonderful. Yes, and if anybody would like, I mean, should I close on a Liverpool accent? Because I can kind of do like a Liverpool, like, you know, Stevie Gerrard, if anybody's watched Premier League football, he was the captain of Liverpool. That's how he kind of
Liverpool.
so.
Like a can of chicken and a Coke.
That's not bad. That's not bad. That's for an American, that's very good, actually,
I'm learning.
probably.
I'm learning.
Yeah.
You got to get on the ball.
Yeah, so
Buses
all
and look
things
cool.
to all men. Accents is, I'm sure, its own course within Grimke Seminary. Just adopting the accent. Kamala Harris took it. It didn't work well for her, but others, I'm sure, will have done better. So thank you so much, Doug, for coming on. Great discussion as always. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Have a great evening, afternoon, whatever time it is, wherever you are. God bless. Fantastic. Great. Thank you, Doug. That was great.